Welcome back to another episode of Breakneck, our short but sweet podcast from the perspective of people building companies. I'm joined by Ian Sweeney, who's the CEO of Beppo. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Pact. We're both building product and dealing with a fast-changing world, maybe faster changing than we're used to. Ian, what's the first topic for today?
Oh, Matt, so many different topics. Let's start with the question for you. Everybody's talking about agents. You and I, our job is to kind of look around the corner, over the horizon. I don't think agents are it. There's something bigger. Take it away.
Yeah, you talked about the Gretzky saying you got to skate to where the puck is, and everybody is talking about agents, and so I think it's worth just a very fast reintroduction of what an agent is. It's like you can give a job or an outcome that you want to deliver to an agent, just like you would have to a human being 5 or 10 years ago, 2 years ago, or now, and that agent will be good enough at that task that it can return you a sufficient result and you can move on, right? So that's an agent. And so the types of things within companies, I've identified three major areas that are getting all the funding and have the most success right now, which is uh, fixing bugs in code or developing small features in code. The second one is developing customer success tools. So, for instance, customer complaints or tickets from customers, those are doing really well. And then the third one is BDR. So, developing new relationships with customers and getting meetings booked. And so, those are the three areas that I've seen where agents are coming into play. But what's the reason I bring up those three in that particular way is that both of those are basically just single points. Um, I have a bug, I want the bug finished. Okay, I save some time. Or I have a customer who has a complaint, they're able to access the information or maybe even resolve some kind of configuration on our side, and now the customer's happy, right? But that's kind of the current state. But as these agents become proliferated, let's take the example of a business development. You want some executives to schedule a meeting with you. So you give it to an agent and you give this person's name and it researches their company and it researches your network and it researches everything that person's ever posted and all those press releases from their company, and it comes up with this perfect strategy. The simplest ones, you send them an email, but maybe it's something like it reaches out to somebody else and asks for an introduction. It uses your own email address. It does the things that I would do if I want an introduction. It's going to go figure out, do I have somebody in my network? Does one of my investors know that person's investors, and so on, right? So you could have pretty sophisticated strategy. Well, what's the natural result if you're an executive getting bombarded by introductions that are engineered by an agent? Well, what you're going to do is you're going to create your own executive assistant agent that's going to knock back these this deluge of requests. And so the big trend where the puck is going in agents is you're going to have agents fighting agents. And I say fighting very specifically. We're going to have conflict between agents, and handling that. If we imagine there's going to be 1 million agents created or 1 trillion agents created, if you're Jensen Huang, well, then those are going to fight. They're going to fight for resources and status, and there's no way around that. And the people who are thinking about how to resolve and are excited about interfacing with those conflicts right now, I think are going to have the most insight in what's coming forward.
So there's two things in there for me. One, you didn't quite say this, but the atomic unit that we're talking about today is an agent. But actually, what you kind of said without saying it is we're going to glue a bunch of these agents together. In other words, we in other language we could say we have very singular outcomes that we're working on now, and the highest value of those, like, hey, book me a meeting. But our world is not singular outcomes, right? It's outcomes stacked upon outcomes and stacked up. So what I'm hearing is multiple different agents put together. I'm intrigued as to what we call that when we put a bunch of different agents together. Is it just an application like we talk about today? But then the other thing that you said, which is super interesting, is those agents are going to fight with other agents or compete, let's say, just like businesses do today. So, any thoughts on A, what we call the agents of agents put together, and then B, what that conflict and that strife looks like?
Yeah, the definition of an agent is super important, and I always go back to maybe agency instead of agents. It's what is the What is the unit of effort and control that you're giving to somebody, right? And so you can give a job to a company, you can give it to a team, you can give it to an individual, you can give it to an AI. The important part is, do these organizations and teams and blocks of people care about their reputation, care about having access to resources, right? So if I'm running a services company, I care that I get paid. I care that I get a better reputation. I can get more customers. But to that extent, I have these desires that need to be satisfied by doing a good job on these outcomes. Right now, you can treat me just like you would treat a person, and that's how we often would interface when I was running a services company. You have that account executive in the account, and you want to run all the information through them. Um, the statement always says power buys from power. So the more empowered my account executive could look in an account, the more that the company would trust them as a person. So, you know, what is the face is one thing, but there could be a face to an organization. And generally, you give it to people because people, they look at a human being and they think person. And I think it'll be the same thing with agents. I think a lot of agents will be sold as people. You'll give it to this person and they have an agency that's full of AI agents, but you're still going to rely on them for trust. So I think that's part of it, is like, you know, these stacked hierarchy of agents on agents on agents. There still will be a face or a central unit of organization that you're essentially building a relationship with. And the way you'll tell what those agents were, like, what is the thing that, you know, what is the brand or personal brand or, you know, cryptographic security layer that you're building a reputation with, and who gets paid, are going to be the central ways of identifying those agents. So does that answer, like, I think one aspect of your question, but we can dig further on the other ones.
Yeah, it does. It makes me think of a bunch of different things. I mean, we've had a conversation. I know you kind of thoughts on this as well, about if we're essentially rebuilding businesses where sort of again, maybe the atomic unit is sort of human like, person like, right? Today we have businesses and the tools for those businesses. We have to, as humans, need to kind of morph ourselves and constrain ourselves to use an application, right? And now what we're saying is, no, we're in the process of rebuilding all of that, and we're building it into outcomes, which is something as humans we really understand, right? So my mind as a product person goes, oh, what does that look like, right? And it's not an agent, right? It still has to have outputs and artifacts and ways of interacting. So to me, I think there's still an application there. So my mind goes there. I know your mind goes a little bit more to the structure of the business and having to kind of re-architect around that. Talk to us a little bit about.
So I think you need to really consider human psychology and what we're prepared to interface with, right? There's a great philosopher named Giambattista Vico. Vico pointed out that the way you talk about any organization is related to the human body. And I'll give you some examples. Let's say you are looking out over a herd of cattle. What do you call it? You call it this many heads of cattle. Why? Because you can see the head. So you associate the head with metonymy for the entire body, right? The head of state, right, is a person who represents the functional head. But even capital is just another word for head. Cap is head. That's the head in Latin, right? So it's like everything is related to the head, right? We refer to the entire continent of Asia just with that little bit on the other side of the waterway and
Yeah. Let me interrupt you and just say, what does it say that we measure units of software in seats, basically in our asses,
yeah,
rather
it's
than our
asses
heads?
and seeds, exactly. No,
Yeah.
and so everything is related to the human body. That is how we relate continents and locations. Our capital cities are literally our own description of our own body projected onto the world, right? And so when you talk about agents, like, we need them to feel like people because that's how we relate to land masses and buildings. Everything is related to our body in that way. And I think there's something deep there. Agents need to present themselves like people for us to interface with them. And I think that's why agents emerge. And I think that's how companies emerge. You got to have the charismatic CEO to some of these companies so people have the ability to relate to it. So you talk about Jensen Huang and Tim Cook and Steve Jobs and these people, because, like, otherwise it's so impossible to think about what Apple even could be. Like, it's beyond understanding. But you know that Tim Apple is a guy, and he, he can be held accountable or things like that, right? So uh, that's the business structure. I think, and I'm going to start to segue to my question for you, which is from a software layer. One thing I've seen a lot these days is people will test every new version, and they'll say, just give me some kind of one-shot version of this coding problem. And they'll say, hey, give this framework code that will allow it to visualize a ball rotating in space with 25 balls internally, and it's doing these things, and it will be visualized instantly. Now, that framework for producing the actual image is just a fixed, it's like a JavaScript visualization library. And so it's agents interfacing with the visualization layer, but the agent isn't visualizing directly. There's this intermediate thing that the agents are working with, right? And you contrast that with maybe like Photoshop, which doesn't have or Unreal Engine, doesn't really have all of the hooks necessary for an agent to efficiently, I could just as well say, hey, develop an entire AAA game that has a medieval setting. And I know I can do that in Unreal Engine, but Unreal doesn't really have all of the hooks necessary because they sell seats. And so I think there's going to be this emerging layer, and this is kind of what I said, like a CRM is built to have seats. So it's very hard for an agent to use a CRM. I think somebody's going to go build a CRM or even a CRM framework, like a data structure model that's open source that can have an agent go and build a CRM for you. So I think these kinds of residual software, whether it's visualization or coding environments or 3D modeling environments or whatever, that are heavily beneficial, the agents themselves will be commoditized, but these kind of nexuses of this is how we all interact together will continue just to be great companies. So, and I'm getting over my skis, but hopefully this expression of
Yeah, no, I agree. I think you said I would say it a slightly different way. There will always be an interface. There will always be those artifacts. What's behind that? We might re-architect, we might restructure the way we get to that outcome, but there's always going to be some sort of level of user interface.
So the question I have for you is, what are the parts of your product development process that you are experiencing the biggest impacts, speed ups, unlocking value right now? Because I know you use it more extensively than me in terms of your day-to-day development.
Yeah, we are hyper focused. Like our mission is changing. We're hyper focused on trying to decide if I'm going to share this publicly, but we are
You can give broad
really,
outlines.
yeah. Let me answer from a different angle. Use some terminology that is in mode currently. So this notion of vibe coding, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Vibe coding, by the way, is bullshit. I'm calling bullshit on vibe coding now. Um, so vibe coding is this notion of, hey, you just kind of kind of in general terms kind of articulate what you need and the system will magically create something for you. That's not the way we create systems, no matter what they're built of. If it's a process on a manufacturing line, right, there's no computers involved, there's people moving around like this, we need structure, right? So vibe coding essentially doesn't have any structure, and you can't build any kind of product that makes any sense. But it's a nice kind of umbrella term for what's changing in terms of the ability to create software products and maybe one day create hardware products too. But really where we're going, there's two steps on this trajectory. The short-term trajectory is we've had product managers for about 40 years, I think maybe 50 years. And product managers take the crazy world that's out there and try to articulate the need in a way that essentially create a general challenge into an engineering challenge. That need is always going to exist. What's going to happen, I think, in the next 12 to 24 months is we're going to shift from vibe coding to kind of product management on steroids, right? I've mentioned before, we at Beppo are skating to where the puck is going. That's not where we're skating. We're skating beyond that. And I'll let other people work out what's beyond that.
All right. Well, people are going to have to come back for later episodes if they want to get the full picture. But I've seen a lot of people talking about that it's actually going back to writing PRDs again. We kind of fell out of fashion because PRD can be its own just kind of process for itself, but you get much better results from vibe coding if you're ultra specific about here's the framework. I saw it was like upload the docs for the frameworks you're using. Specify how you want the code, to API structure, things like that. And the more definition you can give, the less it's going to hallucinate or do weird things. And I think as a result, one of the things that we've seen is helping people with, I call them vibe architects. If you have vibe coders, you need a vibe architect. And the vibe architect is not vibing. They're making up for the complete stability of this vibe coding layer with stable infrastructure that can support fast changing code on top, which is kind of the DevOps model. And I think the other one is QA, is that you're actually going to have to put a lot of work into QA, because if your whole code base can change instantly, which is kind of the whole thing with this DevOps cycle with CI/CD, well, it's going to be that, but even worse, because you're going to need to actually, here's some new outcome I want to deliver. You're going to need to develop the software, the definition, and the testing all at the same time. So I agree that it's not going to be something for production environments if you're just pure vibes.
No, I think coding as a term, maybe it evolves, but what it means today, it doesn't have enough structure to it. It doesn't work. And I'll tell you how. You know that if you try to do it today, you get off the rails pretty quickly. Because really the challenge when you're designing any type of product, you're optimizing in multiple dimensions, right? It's like, I want efficiency right here. We're even seeing with the LLMs, like we want efficient answers, but over here we want really thoughtful answers, right? And so it's hard. It's hard for us as humans. It's a practice skill to optimize something. We can't optimize in multiple dimensions, right? You only optimize in one dimension, but push forward multiple dynamics or elements of a product and try and rank them and improve these three things. And I don't care about these three things. So we'll work on that for the next little while. Call that product management, I don't know, 2.0, 3.0. I don't know where we are with that. But then again, I'm not going to talk too deeply about this because I think we have some interesting stuff going on around about once that's kind of the flywheel spinning on that, where do we go afterwards? And I think we're going to see some really interesting stuff in the next 24 months around what goes beyond vibe coding.
Um, you know, I've worked on prioritization of product. It was my last company, or many years ago now. We worked on how do you take in input data and prioritize product development features as a systematic data enterprise. Obviously, as a product manager, that's your job. And I just come back to the theory of constraints, which is the Eli Goldratt, or Elihu Goldratt, the goal. You read the goal?
A while ago.
And it's about factories, but I think it applies here, is that when all of the dynamics of your company are constrained by this one bottlenecking process, then everything else doesn't really matter, right? Like, what if we got 10 times faster over here? Well, we'd still be bottlenecked at code delivery, so it doesn't matter. And the point with the theory of constraints is once you resolve a bottleneck, say you had a machine that did 100 per hour, and then you go get the big machine that does 1,000 per hour. That's the next level up at your factory. Well, now everything else that you didn't worry about before, because being 10x faster at some earlier or later stage of your process wouldn't affect your overall output. Now that you unblock something, those constraints immediately jump to another part of your factory in a completely unpredictable way. Or maybe it's predictable, but it's not like a one-to-one thing. And I think that's what we're going to see in product development, in the way people use tools, and in company structure, is that you had around technology, there was a peak in like maybe 2021, 2022, where basically anybody who could type into a computer could basically get a job as a software engineer and make $150,000 a year. It was just an insane era. Obviously it's gone. But because code generation was such a constraining function for everything else that happened. And so vibe coding is not going to do your whole job for you. But more and more, software development in a lines per day sense is not going to be the constraining variable. And what's going to immediately happen is every other part of your process, and that's why the vibe product manager, whatever you want to call it, right, is going to immediately think, because that's upstream, and things downstream are going to immediately become constraints, and we're going to have to apply different old school best practices, but then new techniques, and then ultimately AI and kind of these other technologies. And I think what will happen is in a new ecosystem of how everything works together within companies and between companies is going to emerge because of that. And it's totally unpredictable at this point, I think.
Yeah, and it's even more complex than that. If you sort of been articulating kind of the production line of creating a product and the bottlenecks here, and you fix that one, you go, oh, now we're over here, right? But if you go all the way back up to, let's call it ideation, there's a bunch of different factors to be considered in parallel. And I think what AI is going to help us with there is like, I don't know, the market's up for this and something else is happening over there, and then oh, maybe there's an opportunity there, right? There's so that's one additional level of complexity. There's more than that. I think there's probably 4 or 5 domains of complexity. When you're sitting there in the quarterly planning meeting, think about the conversations you're having there, how complex they are, and you think like, oh, we've got it all settled, and then somebody says, oh, whoa, 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 what about this thing? We didn't talk about competition, right? Or we didn't talk about marketing, or we didn't talk about all these things. So there's a bunch of complexity up at the earlier stages of the process. So it's going to be really fascinating when you think about that and then the re-architecting of businesses at the same time and processes. So it's going to be a fun time for quite a few years here. What did you see, if anything, this week that got you excited or interested? And I have one for you if you don't.
I think a lot of people are starting to see the bigger picture on aligning AI, but also aligning agent behavior to overall goals. And it's scary for me because I've been like, I felt like I've been thinking about this problem for a long time, and it was very comforting. Like, okay, nobody's thinking about this, but um, many more people are. I think it's very quickly emerging that people are thinking about, okay, how does this all fit together now? And so that's going to be. We knew it would happen in 2025. This is something you said a month or two ago. It's like eventually we're going to think about coordination. And I've seen a lot more academic papers, which have probably been in the works for 8 or 9 months. So, I think that's going to be an emerging theme, and it's always good to see, the validation that at least that the academic level are starting to really see a lot of the foundational science coming out. What about you?
I was excited by something in the real world this week. I looked at, I don't know if you saw the Gemini robot, Google's robot, using which is reasoning around physical objects and then doing various different things. So if you haven't seen it, we'll put the videos in the show notes. But if you remember a couple of weeks ago, I was talking about taking trash out of my trash can in my garage, saying it's going to be years before they're going to be able to do this, and it still will be. But it was super interesting that it understood how to pick up a bunch of grapes, right, versus a banana, right? Things that for us as humans, our dexterity is really, really evolved. But and then I posted something earlier on LinkedIn about this as well. I'm a car guy. I have spent many, many weekends underneath cars, fiddling with stuff and putting belts on pulleys. And I have so many grazed knuckles and smashed thumbs from doing that. It's really hard, really hard. Strength and dexterity at the same time in confined environments. There's a video of Gemini putting a belt on a pulley. All right, thanks, Matt. Talk soon.
Adios.